And I've started recording. So thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Matthews.
And I'm Sarah Barnaby.
And together we founded and are co-directors of Babies Project. So we are currently doing a 4-week campaign about sharing information about that we're calling Preparing for Caring. And it's based on a workshop that we created to try to share material with planning and preparing parents. But as part of that, we've also created a handout that we're very excited about sharing. And I'm gonna just pop it up on my screen for a moment. And we've made this handout, it's available, here it is in English, but we have it available in Spanish also, in Finnish. And one of our campaigns this month is to try to get this kind of available to as many people as possible. As part of that, we're doing these 4 weeks of blog posts and 4 weeks of these Zoom calls. And last week we did our first one about the guiding principles. This week we're going to focus in on Baby Ball. So we're going to do a little more introduction and orientation, and then Sarah, who wrote the blog post for this week, is going to talk through the ideas in Baby Ball. And then we'll have time at the end to discuss, to hear your comments and thoughts, and answer any questions or discuss any ideas you might want to share. So if you're interested in getting this handout, you can get to it by going to our website, which is babiesproject.org. And the Preparing for Caring tab lets you go through and download it in different languages. So we invite you to do that if you haven't yet. I'm going to take down the sharing. And go back and say, and ask how many of you have, and you could just do a thumbs up or a wave. Have you all seen this handout before? Has anybody seen it? Have you already downloaded it? Yes, yay, thumbs up. No, not yet, okay. So some of you have and some of you haven't. One of the things we're most excited about on the handout is that we've got little drawings, and a friend of Sarah, who's an artist, has been doing these drawings for us, which we're really happy to have to support all the words. So let's go through and maybe in the chat, people could put in a comment about where you're tuning in from, if you're willing to. So are you, what country are you in? If you'd be willing to, in the chat on the side. And Brooklyn, Spain, yeah, all over. Thank you for coming from all the different time zones. Hi, Rachel, welcome.
Hi, thanks.
California. Oakland. And if some of you are BMC trained, some of you are BMC students, some of you might not know anything about BMC, body mind centering, which is practice we do. But I'm wondering if people want to share, and I'm going to suggest that you just turn on your, unmute yourself for a moment if you want to say how you found your way here. Like, do you know Sarah? Do you know me? Did you just find us on Facebook? So I'm wondering if people would go through, and if you want to share.
Should we start?
I'm in the SME program. I'm Argenta, and this is David. And hi. We have a baby here.
Hi, baby. Hello.
Yeah. I thought there might be a baby down there. Great.
Her name's Lucinda, but we call her Luda.
Luda. Sweet. Well, glad to have you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Anybody else want to share?
Well, I live in Oakland, and I did the SME and I did the IDME. You know, Amy was my teacher, Sarah was my colleague, and yeah, the way I found that they are doing this is through the newsletter. I receive it regularly, the Babies Project newsletter.
Great. Thanks. Hi, Ashley. Welcome. We're just going around, if you're just coming in, we're just asking people if they want to unmute themselves and say how they found their way here, or what brings them here.
Yeah. I don't know.
Go ahead, Julie.
I'm a SME, IDME educator, and I'm in the practitioner program actually. I've met Sarah, Satu as well.
Okay.
And for this information, I had it from Facebook, I think.
Nice. Cynthia, did you unmute yourself to say?
Yeah, I'm doing the IDME. I've done the IDME one course already. And I'm also doing I'm halfway through the SME. Yeah. So I'm a student for both IDME and SME.
Wonderful. Welcome.
I'm Leah. I know both Sarah and Amy, longtime students of theirs, and I am doing the IDME program.
Thanks, Leah.
I'm Ashley, and this is my baby Florian.
Hi, Ashley. Hi, Florian. Welcome.
My friend Kelty's here too.
Hi, Kelty.
And I'm an RSME in Continuum and another practice called the Mitzvah Technique. And I'm in Saskatchewan in Canada. And I followed the Babies Project kind of online, and also my friend Caitlin told me about it too. She did a bit of training with Amy, and my baby is 6 months yesterday, and we did our first online one-to-one session with Sarah. And I've always been kind of curious about the IDME program. I've been reading Lenore's book since I had him, and I'm really enjoying it. So, yeah.
Super. Thanks, Ashley. Welcome. See, does anybody else? You don't have to say anything, but.
Hi, I will. I'm Ashley's friend Kelty.
Hi, Kelty.
She hooked me into you guys, well, before your first Zoom call, but I couldn't make it, and I just kind of got a chance to get interested in it in the last couple days. This is little baby Era, and he is 4.5 months old. And yeah, I'm really, really interested in it. We're just interested in how I listened to the first Zoom call yesterday, and you said something about having just something to push up against, you know, by so firmly presenting your principles and approach. And I really like that, because I like when people just deliberately present something without any hesitation. And I think I'm just excited to see where I'm resonating, because there's already lots resonating, and then where there's things that I'm like, oh, maybe I have a different approach in my own philosophy, or just in the reality of what we're doing. So yeah, I'm just excited to be along now for the next few calls. Thank you for offering this.
You're very welcome. Thank
I'm
you.
also in Saskatchewan, a few hours from where Ashley and Florian are.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. Super.
Hello.
Okay.
I'll mute Erin now.
Thanks for saying hi, Erin. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to move along, and Sarah, I'm going to invite you to talk now about the ideas you put in we have in the blog post about Baby Ball.
Okay, thank you. It's great. Thank you for coming. It's really nice to see that we have some parents with their babies, and we have people who work with babies. Nice to see what happens with that intersection. Baby Ball. One of the reasons we decided to show the handout is to provide some context, but also because for Baby Ball, maybe in particular, a picture can sum up a lot. But there's a lot of words to go along with what Baby Ball is, what we think Baby Ball is, and what we think is kind of wrapped up in it. And this handout, as Amy said, we originally developed to go along with this workshop that we teach, to give the people who come something to take home with reminders and some illustrated, like, oh yeah, that's the way they taught us this. And then after that, we decided we wanted to publish it and get the ideas out. And it's been a bit of a question, like, how much does the handout stand alone? We didn't create it to stand alone, but we're putting it out there and seeing how it resonates with people, and then also doing these things so we can try to unpack it and all the ideas we think are underneath it. So the bullets that we pulled out in our handout about Baby Ball, the first one says, the legs are gathered in, the arms are in front and the hands are available, and the spine is in flexion. It comes off maybe as a bit of a formula, but we're looking at this shape of flexion and limbs gathered in and drawn towards midline as part of a cycling of out and in. And what Baby Ball is, among other things, is a way to support a baby to come back in, to settle, to rest, to sleep, to turn away from the stimulation of the world, maybe to get some support for crying. We don't talk about that so much. We don't talk about that in the handout, but that can be part of it. So that's one idea, is the shape of it, in a way. And while we're talking about the shape, it's with the understanding that the shape does not guarantee the outcome. So it's part of it, but it's not all of it. And as we say, like the flexion, folding forward, and this coming in, gathering in this way, as opposed to out and open, the in tends to come in with a quieter state, a more inward state. And then this out, which an extreme of the out might be a big startle or a big arching back, is more about being out. And out and in are not value judgments. What we're looking at more is, how do we help a baby cycle between the times when they're out and the times when they're in. And we have the big cycles of day and night, of out and in. And then within that, for a baby, there's multiple cycles during the day of nap time and waking time. And even within that, there might be many cycles of not sleep necessarily, but time to take a break, time to bring them back in. Being out can be new, big, overwhelming for a baby. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to the next point. And there will be time for asking questions, commenting, etc. as we go on. The next idea is holding a baby more towards horizontal than vertical. And that relates to a few ideas. One of them is that from a developmental movement perspective, we think that babies best start to learn to walk, to get upright, by being horizontal, being on different surfaces of their body horizontal, and gradually, mostly from their bellies, from their tummies, getting up towards vertical. And when we bring a baby to vertical before they have figured out how to do that and are in that process, we feel like it can run the risk of the baby's perception getting ahead of what they can handle in their movement. So there's a way we're bringing them up in the world, and their world gets bigger because they can see more. It's stimulating to their nervous system to come upright. And we're making the case that helping a baby's movement development and their perceptual development to go along with each other so that they can inform each other and support each other. It might sound like perceptual development getting ahead might be a good thing. Like, doesn't perception also have to do with brain? Yes, but we think out of relationship with what they can do as a whole person is not so helpful, as a general rule, and in particular with babies and their development. Next bullet is provide support from underneath. And this is another both very physical and also becomes very metaphorical developmental movement principle, that we gradually get up from below, from feeling our support underneath. We are earth creatures living on land, which means gravity is a big reality of our life. And we want babies to get familiar with gravity, to bond with gravity, to feel comfortable in different relationships to gravity, starting from horizontal, again, gradually getting themselves up. And we think that when anyone feels support from underneath, that we know better where we are. Like, it relates to our, when we're holding baby, there's a way we are the ground. When, in contrast, we hold a baby more upright or underneath, part of them is hanging, and we don't think that gives them a sense of where they are and a sense of safety that they can settle into and settle in relationship to. So baby ball can include support from underneath. And then continuing the idea of us as a baby's environment, moving to the next bullet, create a responsive container with your body and arms. So there's a way we're doing a kind of surrounding hold in baby ball and giving a baby a three-dimensional sense of their environment and a sense of container. I think some of the pictures really capture beautifully the sense of kind of surrounding, and it's also a sense of gathering the baby into our own center of gravity or our own body weight. And then one of the perhaps most challenging parts in our experience working with people and teaching them this is the container part of it. And it's something we might end up unpacking a lot more in the questions and discussion. But the idea is that we are creating a container as we hold the baby, as we envelop them. We could say we're cradling them or creating a living womb, outside womb. And babies often push against the container. And it can be a question that doesn't always have obvious answers. What's going on with this kicking out, or it can be arching, or it can be, and when it's interpreted that my baby doesn't want to be here, that's their response, they just kick out. We don't necessarily think that's helpful. Now, depending on the age of the baby and other factors, it might be the case that they don't want to be there. But what we experience often is that asking a baby, inviting a baby, bringing them into baby ball, that response is, first of all, possibly them expressing where they are in their out range. And then by us providing a container, it gives them something to, I'm going to reuse this idea of bumping up against or feeling themselves within, and eventually being able to settle into it. And in that process of pushing against and feeling it, and also feeling like, oh, here we are, I'm in this container, can I settle into it? And then the holder, the container person who's creating this baby ball environment, how do we respond to the baby's movement? Not to go away and let the container evaporate, but to let it be responsive, to let the baby feel our presence and our response, and give them the resisting support that'll let them settle. That's the idea. Okay, next bullet point. Supporting midline organization. In our world, early developmental milestone that we think is super important and we put a lot of focus on in the first few months, it's called coming to midline, or we often say finding midline, or we'll say this baby has midline, or they're in the process of getting to midline. And one of the indications that a baby has midline is that when they're lying on their backs, they can volitionally get their hands together. They can bring their hands to their mouth. They can orient their head to midline rather than it being turned to one side or the other, which is more where most babies come in as newborns. Like center is not default for a newborn. And they can gather their legs in away from the floor, so they can kind of make themselves a package in relation against gravity, against the pull of gravity, and they can organize themselves along their center axis, hands coming together along this axis. It's also about the eyes converging and being able to work together to be able to focus and be able to see depth and three-dimensionality. So we think one of the valuable aspects of baby ball is bringing a baby back to midline. While it's a developmental milestone, it's also something we think that's worth reaffirming, practicing, coming back to. In a way, we think that it's not an accident that there are a lot of movement and contemplative practices in the world now that have some aspect of midline related to them. And then the last bullet sums up a lot of we've said already. Offer a physical position to support calming, inward focus, and quiet alertness. So while we are infant developmental movement educators and our focus is on movement development, we also feel that one of the ways that we can best support that development is by actually supporting the going in part. Trusting that when a baby is ready to cycle back out to being active, that they will learn from their own curiosity. We don't need to teach them. We need to take care of helping to support them to rest, to integrate, to express and process whatever their previous experiences have been. And then finally, all of this can be applied, we think, more metaphorically. And we think that while baby ball is not necessarily the easiest thing for some people to learn, we think it's a valuable parenting practice in a way, and practice for what in a very physical way becomes more metaphorical as the baby gets older. And this question of how do we provide a container? How as parents or caregivers do we set up boundaries that are clear but responsive, that support the baby's knowing where they are, their sense of orientation and safety and comfort, so that then they can go out when they're ready to go out and lead from their curiosity. I think that's a good stopping place.
Super. Thanks, Sarah. Whew. Yeah. We talk a lot about baby ball, and getting a blog post written to try to encapsulate our ideas was quite a task. So what we'd like to do now is open the space up for any of your questions or comments, or something Sarah said that you want to hear more about, or something you've heard that is a different idea than what we say. some of what we say doesn't match what the pediatricians say, for example, or kind of what common wisdom is. So we're really happy to be in discussion around the ideas, because it's really, like Sarah said at the beginning, it's important to us that the underlying ideas make sense more than making the particular shape look a certain way. So I invite you to either write a question in the chat or unmute yourself and say something. Or I'm looking at Ashley, yeah, say something about your experience working with Baby Ball.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Definitely like actually doing the baby ball with a baby makes me have so many questions. So I have two main questions. One is from support, one is with support from underneath. So when I'm holding him in baby ball, is it important that I like get really under his pelvis and support him? Because sometimes I do find myself like doing this thing where I'm kind of slinging him up by his legs and I'm grabbing things. Is that not a good? I try to get him like two-handed, you know, because right now he does like to kind of do this eat his feet baby ball. So we used to do a lot like this. This was like our position after Caitlin introduced me to baby ball. But I do, you know, I'm not totally supporting him from underneath here.
Yeah, great question. You know, I think I said something about this enveloping hold can, like part of what we think it's helpful for you as the caregiver is that it connects your baby's weight into your own weight. And from what I can see, when you were doing it without literally being underneath, that that you looked connected in that way where your two body weights were connected. And then if you're supported from underneath, there's a way that your underneath support is conveyed in that making him part of you is one way to look at that. So there's a way that no, not necessarily do you have to be right underneath if you can give that feeling that, and part of it is the baby's sense of their own safety. And practice can help you feel it, and also seeing what the baby's response is, that they feel safe, that they don't feel like they're hanging or in danger of falling.
Yeah, because he will definitely startle his arms out if he feels like he is starting to fall or he doesn't feel supported. Okay, thank you. So my second question is about the upright. I feel like we don't have that experience much where he wants to be upright. Like he isn't really invested in always coming upright. Like I hear that a lot from other moms. However, he does go through periods, more so when he was littler, where he really has lots of reflex. Just short times, seems to be around his growth spurt. He'll get like 3 or 4 days of it. And I feel like in that situation, feels like he needs to be upright a lot more. So do you say anything about reflex?
Well, I think that one thing we would say is when we're saying upright, we're really talking about this vertical orientation where there's no side to side tilt. And so, and then the only way that they're learning to hold their head is completely in the middle, where this idea of baby ball, like getting the package on all sides, and we'll talk more next week about all 4 sides, but that not being perfectly vertical means that we have to learn to, or the baby learns to use their head doing some of these sideways things. So I would say in relationship to reflex, that it's possible to have the head higher than the stomach, like to help the gravity be from head to stomach down, but not be perfectly vertical and upright.
Right.
So what we're looking at is movement-wise, how do we not slip into the habit of always only being vertical because of how that it it can make other choices seem uncomfortable or unfamiliar. And then what we really want is to have all those different head positions available.
I have a question about reflux as well. Often when babies have reflux, they're seeking extension. They're in sympathetic mode and they're really upset. And it's very hard to bring them into flexion. Would you push that in any way to get them into flexion when they're actively seeking really fierce extension?
I think that what Sarah said about the cycling aspect in baby ball would come in here, that if a baby is really actively going into extension, we're not going to force them into flexion, but we'll follow it out, but not leave them there. So that out cycles into in. So that flexion becomes what they return to, but it doesn't have to be the only place they are.
So would a blanket swing be a good intermediary to slowly bring a baby into that?
Well, blanket swing, I think, generally puts a baby into some kind of flexion. So,
right, but it seems it can happen more gradually, maybe.
Yeah, and like a blanket, I mean, it offers that kind of something for them to push against, which is also part of the idea I think we're trying to get at. I think, Sarah, you wanted to say something too.
Yeah. Well, I have a doll, so it is often like if a baby's really out, if it's reflux or something else and they're arching, then it's kind of like they'll go out, and at the end of them going out, there's usually a softening, and then we bring them back in. And then that might go in and out and in and out and eventually be able to settle. And some of the beautiful photos we have of babies in baby ball are after a process. So they don't necessarily just go boom, and they're there. We find that when a baby and the caregiver become more familiar with baby ball, both roles of it, that it can be a faster trip to get settled into it. It's a place they know. The parent or caregiver has a sense of the baby and what the process might be. And of course, it depends on the baby and where they are at that moment. But we're not saying squish them in and force them in. And we also, I want to say about the reflux question, we have questions about the interaction between reflux and the arching that can go along with it. And it's something of a chicken and the egg thing that we're not saying there's any particular answer to, but if a baby, like how much is the reflex showing their out state as a general tone question? And can we give them more flexion and more settling and more, which is going to help their nervous system. It's going to help all of that. It might help their digestion. Because we think if a baby stays in the kind of extension in an out state and they're not brought in, that we don't think that's going to be helpful for digestive issues in general. So there might be a question about how much to go into something like baby ball if the baby is like actively seems really uncomfortable. But if they're not familiar with flexion in general, and that's not a place they can go to, we have a question about supporting that baby overall, including the digestion aspect of it.
Which in the really big picture, I think goes back to what we're looking for is the baseline to offer, to be like as a baseline, horizontal and gathered in, able to come to midline and able to settle. And it goes against some of the common wisdom that like babies need to be stimulated, they need to be taught, they need to be brought into some alert state so that they will learn. And we're coming from a premise that babies, if they feel safe and oriented and comfortable and bonded, they will get curious, which is what last week's talk was about. But that that we kind of reorient for ourselves from like, oh, how do we keep them stimulated, to how do we help them settle so that they can be stimulated, they can come into extension. For sure, all of that we want to have happen, but that they know how to come back in, which we think is a question for all of us also, to figure out how to get quiet and settle down and not stay on the reaching, going out, getting kind of end of the things. So yeah, so I'm going to stop there. So it's a really big picture thing for us, as well as the concrete, the like moment to momentness of what that cycling is in a baby's attention.
I have a question,
Mm-hmm.
which is, how do you find that Baby Ball and just your work intersects with baby wearing? Because my little guy, we kind of do a very similar cycle throughout his wake windows all day. Is he'll wake up, and that seems to be the time that he's most comfortable on the floor and on his own. So we'll wake up, feed, change, and then I lay him down, and either I'll be playing with him or on the floor with him, or sometimes that'll be when I'm getting something done and he's not mobile yet, so he just sticks around and does his own thing. But then as it progresses towards when he's going to need to eat and nap again, he'll get progressively fussier and less happy on the floor, to which at some point I'll pick him up and start to wear him so I can continue going about my day. So I guess I haven't really used Baby Ball at all yet. So I could see that potentially, like me checking in with him and balling him up from time to time, maybe extending the time that he's okay on the floor. But I also really do like wearing him, and it is kind of part of our lifestyle as well. So I'm just interested in your approach to that.
We're fans of baby wearing. It's great that the baby's connected to a person, another living person, and can feel that. Barbara just put something in the comments about slings, and that. Barbara, do you want to say something about that and where you're coming from?
I guess somehow before I knew there was such a thing as Baby Ball, it just made sense to me to package the baby that way. And I guess it goes back to when my kids were little, they're adults now, but I wore them in slings all the time at all different ages. And so they were always in some kind of flexion. Mm-hmm. And it just made sense to me organically. I don't understand where it came from, but now I see people with walking down the street with babies upright, and the baby's legs are flapping in the breeze and with every step. And it just makes me really concerned for their hips and their alignment, everything, and just their sense of where they are in space. Mm-hmm. So it just always, I keep going back to slings, and I can get very few moms really interested in a sling, in a ring sling, as opposed to these structured carriers. So anyway, that's where I was coming from.
Yeah.
Well,
you can go.
There's a few things we start, well, one of the places we start is facing in and not facing out. Like in the question of carrying, for sure, whatever they're in, can they face in and not face out? Particularly for as long as possible. And sometimes a question comes up like, oh, but the baby's interested, they want to see what's going on around outside. And what we don't like about a baby facing out in a carrier is that they can't get into Baby Ball and they can't stop being face on to whatever's coming. So that whole idea of being able to go in and settle and stop paying attention, the carrier holds them in an extended position. So one starting thing is, if the baby will turn in, that just facing in will will diminish some of the stimulation. And then if we can, in the little ones, in the carriers facing in, can they crisscross their legs? Because if they can crisscross their legs and gather in when they're facing in, it'll bring them into a kind of baby ball. And yeah, like Sarah's doing with the doll there. And a lot of people ask us about this vertical question because there's a lot that's taught about being vertical. So you can be chest to chest, you can be heart to heart, you can be like you can have your faces close together, and all of those things we see value in. They're wonderful for bonding time, and in the same sense, being vertical in the carriers so that your faces are right there. There's a lot of value in that. But movement-wise, it does not support them in learning to move. So what we also want to do is just start to distinguish between what's helping them be in a situation where they can learn and what's helping them do other things like bond. So yes, we think ring slings are also great if moms can handle them and can do it on both sides. For us, one of the questions about a sling is that people often get used to it on only one side. And then if they only do it on one side, then that asymmetry also is not helpful. So can you sling on both sides would be a question. A lot of times what we do also is whatever they come in wearing, we try to help them like get it in what they have, rather than saying what you have doesn't work, you have to go do something else. Now, sometimes they're curious and they say, what would you recommend? And then like a wrap or a sling would be really great. But with whatever they have, if we can get them facing in and into a position, then if they're facing in, also so that their arms aren't down in the straps, but up, and if their legs can be gathered in, then they can be in baby ball on the front of us, and that has some value.
So overall, we're kind of problem solving. How can we make this as baby ball-like as possible?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we also feel like while in, hi Amy, in the conventional carriers, they are upright, especially if their hands are in front and against the chest of the carrier. There's a way that it can have a kind of tummy time quality to it, even being upright.
Mm-hmm. Except for when their head falls back. The
Yes.
downside to being upright is that they end up, so depending on the carrier, we'll say like, put your hand there, this head back thing, no head back. So, yeah.
That's really valuable. Thank you. I just actually switched from a soft-shelled carrier that I was gifted to a ring sling. And immediately, like the first time I put this sling on, I was like, this is so much better, just intuitively. And then I also immediately was like, okay, I need to do this, switch it back and forth, because otherwise that's not going to be good for my body or his. It's good for him to be on either side or directly in the front. But it feels like the most kind of natural, organic type of way to carry a baby. So that's really nice.
Great.
And he can get into that cozy little
Yeah.
shell. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Other questions or comments? Things you want us to unpack?
I do have a question regarding the age range. Like, where do you see this more benefiting? And also, but I have the sense that it continues. Also, I'm noticing I'm babysitting a 2.5 years old boy at the moment, and he's going through this emotional crisis at time, and the way he kills in is quite, it makes me feel, it reminds me these moments when I see the baby bowl, I just remind this moment of going in emotionally. And yeah, if you could just say a bit, there is an emotional aspect of it that is really, if you could say a few words around the age range where you...
Yeah, we think baby ball applies to all ages. it changes, but it applies.
All the way up to adult.
Yeah. So with toddlers, well, as babies get mobile, as they begin to crawl and be able to move away from their main person, so I'm picturing a parent or caregiver kind of hanging out with them and the baby going off. And what we see once they get mobile is they'll go out and explore, and then there'll be times when they come back, kind of coming back to home base. So that's another expression of this out and in cycle. And sometimes as they get more mobile and they get older, when they come in, it doesn't necessarily look like a full baby ball, and it might not last very long. But we still encourage the parents to, when they come in, to give them some sense of containment or some compression, or like, yes, you're here, and it helps them feel themselves. It helps them maybe settle into something, and then they can go back out. And then with what's commonly in our country at least called a tantrum for a toddler, like, how do we give them containment? And we've heard some parents say that it's effective if the baby is or the toddler's facing outward, and to give them kind of a container that they can push against, keeping both of them safe, is one possibility that can show up.
Mm-hmm. So we start teaching baby ball right away, like in our newborns class. It's what we have to offer right away. And then part of what happens is sometimes as you know, when we see a baby every week or every couple of weeks, that sometimes the caregivers will come in and say, well, now when do we stop doing this? And like Sarah said, it changes, but we keep doing it. And it might look different in a 10-month-old than it does in a 2-week-old. But we'll keep looking for baby ball, because at every stage of growth or at every stage of development, right, there then is another chance. There's more stimulus coming in, like a baby gets to a new level, or a toddler gets to a new level, or gets a new skill. There's all these new things that they're aware of. Their world gets bigger, more stimulus happens. That's when we need, one of the many times, we really need to give them baby ball. So when their world gets bigger, we think our job is to be like, okay, and here's how to get quiet again. So that cycling in and out, like it might start small, and like with a newborn, they're awake, they're asleep, they're awake, they're asleep, they're awake, they're asleep. And then awake gets longer, right? The cycle gets longer and the world gets bigger. And as adults, we're awake for these long stretches of time. Like Sarah said, the cycle of day and night. But within that, we still have these moments of out and in and out and in and out and in. And I think we see it in adults, that adults can get stuck out. Anybody can get stuck out. But I feel like I really see it in adults too, that we get stuck out and we don't know how to stop and go in. So that what we can do as caregivers is keep helping babies know, babies and toddlers and children and friends and everybody, like, okay, we can stop and go in and be quiet now. And so baby ball is a really concrete way to do that with the people we get to physically touch and offer containment to. And I mean, both Sarah and I baby ball our partners, and they're like, oh, so
yeah. And
they baby ball.
Thank you so much for those words. That inspires me a lot in from a framework of attachment as well, of course.
Yeah.
Working from even from a circle of security perspective, like, you know, it's seen as an expansion and an extension, and coming in and out. This is it's such a beautiful way of also framing it from parents in terms of attachment perspective. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, on that topic, I'll say that we believe that what we're teaching and offering and what's contained in between the principles and the handling is very much in line with attachment theory and trauma, all of the trauma approaches these days that are really based on safety One more thing about the out and in, and that keeps applying, is we see lots of babies who need help coming in, who might be called overstimulated. We try not to use labels in general, but so one of the questions, like, well, my baby likes to be bounced or likes to be picked up, or whatever it is that's stimulating and gets them really up or out. And a question in general is like, all right, so then, or sometimes we talk about this when the parent says, I'm carrying my baby facing out in the carrier. And we try not to say, don't do that. We try to say, here's why we don't recommend it. And they're going to make their choices. And so in some of those conversations, we might offer, so then can you see if they can come back in? So an indication of, is this too much stimulation? It's like, how far out do they go? And what is it to bring them back in? And we want babies for their range of out and in to become more flexible or more resilient or a bigger range, but it's still, and it's another question about how long to have them. I'm thinking about Kelty on the floor and tummy time, et cetera, when they start giving us indication that they've maybe had enough. It's like, how long is enough? Well, is it relatively easy for them to come back in and to settle? Then maybe it wasn't too far out. And in the helping them settle, we're also helping them eventually expand that range and eventually be able to do it more on their own, more of that regulation.
We have just a few more minutes. Does anybody who hasn't said anything want to say anything? Yeah, Dave.
Hi. So I have a question. So when I'm holding the baby in my arms, I do my best to get her into the baby ball position. But she kind of tends to kind of naturally, I don't know how, she kind of like wiggles into this position where she kind of turns her body 90 degrees. So one arm is kind of on the floor and her head's in my arm. And so she's looking in at me, but then a lot of times she'll fall asleep and then her head will kind of tilt back a little bit. And so I kind of have this dilemma where I don't know, I don't want to like force her head to come forward because she's like asleep and she looks peaceful. So, and I've tried it so many times over and over, but she kind of like settles in this kind of similar position in my arms. And I don't know if that's okay for her to have her head tilted, like that.
Well, this is that we see this happen a lot, and it's where we bring up that particularly when a baby falls asleep, they're probably not choosing that position, but that's where gravity takes them when they let go, and that's the moment when it is up to you as the container, as the holder of their experience to help them find a relationship to gravity that doesn't involve the head going back. So we would say, if you can, to shift her position, to bring your arm up a little bit, or to change the position so that she's not hanging out, like sleeping with her head back.
But I don't think it's gravity though, because her head's actually moving from side to side, if that makes sense. It's like she's,
Yeah.
Do you have is that a doll behind you?
Well,
it's a rat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We don't want to problem solve it here, but
it just, yeah. She's facing in towards you, right?
Yeah,
her face is in. Yeah. So I'm going to say in the position of it in general, like what we want is as they fall asleep for their heads to not fall back. So,
Yeah.
so, and that I suspect that if you put your hand behind her head, like she might not be actively pressing back, but that in the relaxing kind of gravity's pulling her back. And what it also brings up, which might be a good note to finish on, is that part of what we're negotiating here, especially if it's baby ball is in a familiar position, is a dialogue between what's familiar, and that babies might sometimes move into what's more familiar, but what's familiar and where gravity tends to take them, which sometimes gets connected to what's familiar, is not necessarily the position in which they can settle most easily. But what's familiar might help them settle, right? But long term, and it's a kind of balance we have to keep holding about long term, head back, we don't think is helpful. So now is a moment when you and how you hold her can keep head back from becoming so familiar that she starts to choose it in a way that is going to get in the way later with her movement choices. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Do you have anything?
So I think we're going to start wrapping up here. It's 2:00. And I thank you all for coming. And if you have any comments or if you want to put anything in the chat about if you found this useful or helpful, or if there's something you want more of next time, we will next week we have 2 more weeks of this event that we're doing. Next week, we're focusing on all 4 sides is what the is kind of the heart of it. It's about handling and positioning, but we're going to really look at how it is that we're their environment. We are their environment. It's kind of this, like, more of this question about what's familiar and habitual, and why we think it's so important for them to be positioned on all 4 sides of their body. So there'll be a new blog post next Tuesday and another one of these talks next Thursday. We'll record it again. And if you haven't, again, downloaded our handout, please, you're welcome to download it and share it. We really want to spread the information as much as possible. So if you find it useful or you know people who would like it, please feel free to send it out. And we'll keep getting it in more languages as we go. So thank you very much for coming. Great to see you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.